Hello and welcome to a conversation on Daily Bern. I'm your host, Eric Miller. I'm joined today by an awesome lifelong advocate and fierce and fiery, tremendous progressive from the great state of Washington, Jason Caw. How you doing, Jason?
I'm doing fantastic. Really looking forward to this coming Tuesday when we start seeing how the votes are turning out for our primary. I'm really confident that we're going to get onto the general ballot. So things are looking really good.
Right on. Yes, you mentioned it's a jungle primary. Explain to folks what that means and who else is in the race.
Well, jungle primary simply means that whoever is filed for the seat, the top two candidates go on to the general. Right now, there's myself, there's the corporate incumbent, Rick Larson, who is seeking a 10th term, and there are 6 Republicans. This is a D+10 district, and so that means that in any given election year in this district, the congressional Democrat will beat the congressional Republican if that's how it is by 10 points or more, and that has absolutely been the case the last few years. Larson has beaten the challengers, Libertarian in 2018, Republican in 2016. He's beaten them handily. So there's no danger at all of this district flipping to a Republican seat. Right. And the best scenario for this district, because it is a Democratic, because it is a blue district, is to have myself next to Larson on the general election ballot. It's going to give the people of this district a choice that they have not ever had since he's been in office.
Right on. Yeah, that's, in those D+10, like you said, D+10 districts, why would you not want the fightingest fighters, right? And fightingest fighting, right? Exactly, right, yeah. Exactly, yeah. That running towards the center of moderation, it just gets, just waters down.
And it is one of the things that people in this district who consider themselves, good Democrats are frustrated about with Larson's representation. They don't want the district to go Republican. It's not going to, and so that's understandable. But they are also frustrated that they're not getting better representation out of him.
Right on. And we'll get into how terrible he is going forward. You mentioned he was a corporate Democrat. Love to talk about that stuff. So let's highlight that. But a little bit about your background, your activism. You were heavily involved in the Bernie campaign. Can you talk about your sort of background politically heretofore?
Sure. So I got my start in activism. I just turned 49 a couple of weeks ago, and I actually got my start in activism when I was 19. So I'm 30 years into anti-war activism. I got out in the streets as a sophomore at the University of Washington back in 1990, 1991, protesting the Desert Storm Iraq invasion, and so we were met with the police. We camped out on the steps of the federal building night after night, but the police response 30 years ago is nothing compared to what we're seeing lately with the protests in Portland and Seattle. I was a high school math teacher for almost 20 years. I love education. I love being connected with my students. And even though I was a math teacher, I always talked a little bit of politics and activism with my students. And it's really nice since I have launched this campaign. I've had a bunch of students get back in touch with me. They say, hey, we saw your signs. We're doing text banking, phone calling. Is this the same Mr. Call who taught at? And I was like, yep, that's me. And right. I remember a good many of my students. And so I've actually had them come back 15 years later, first time I've seen them in 15 years, hearing about them, hearing about their families, and they want to help with this campaign. So they know what kind of a person that I am and that I fight for justice. So I've also done, social justice activism. I've marched in the streets with Black Lives Matter and the Answer Coalition in support of Palestinian rights. I've taken my own kids. I've got teenagers. We've been down to the Washington, the youth climate strikes here in Seattle. My kids have wanted to go. They see me as an activist. They want to be a part of that. And so I feel like I'm raising my kids right on that front. Right on. And with the Bernie campaign, being an activist and having worked as a volunteer for a number of candidates, I'll throw out Dennis Kucinich and Howard Dean, back in the early 2000s. You learn how to get involved with your local Democratic Party. And I know for some people that's anathema because, it's difficult to listen to and be involved with a lot of people who are much more corporate minded than we are on the left. But the reality is, a number of us Bernie activists, we figured out how to make inroads into the Democratic Party. I got myself elected in 2016 to the Washington State Democrats Central Committee, where I sit now representing my legislative district. And so we have made a lot of inroads there. It's a long slog. There aren't enough of us. I do want to encourage people to get involved in your local Democratic Party, as well as, as part of an inside-outside strategy, as well as DSA, as well as like I do with Socialist Alternative, and I'm a dues-paying DSA member as well. So there's a lot of ways that we can sort of take control and push our policy, but I don't want people to dismiss that the Democratic Party is a massive structure, and we do have to chip away at it from the inside.
Right on. Yeah. And thanks for all that work to date.
Sure.
So did you, I'm guessing you probably considered running in 2018 and then pulled the trigger in 2020. Like, how did you get to actually run this time around?
Actually, I did not consider it in 2018. I was asked in 2018, really had no interest in it. I don't mind getting a little personal. I got divorced in 2017. And so I was just trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life and take care of my kids. And, but activism, it was interesting. One of my very close friends here in the activist community said, you're involved with this so that we can help take care of you. And so my activist cred just and involvement just grew after that period of my life. And, everything's back on track. And, I've been very active on the state committee, submitting resolutions. So it came to me in 2018 because of my work on the state committee. Actually, I'm sorry. It came to me in 2019 where a local leader of a Democratic Party organization said, we're never going to have a better opportunity to unseat Larson. I think Trump has caused a lot of local people to say, we need to push harder left. We need to push harder left than we have been, because we are really up against the forces of fascism here. America, I believe, is a proto-fascist country, and we have to be very, very careful about how far we let things slide. And so a lot of people look at Larson's representation and go, well, he's given a green light to all of the things, the resistance, hashtag resistance is really only token. When it comes down to what are the forces of the oligarchy that are pushing this fascism in our government, he's right there behind it. I don't think he believes he is, but he's working for big business. He's working for the forces that control and suppress the working class. And that's what we have to get activated. We have to get the working class activated. So I had people look at me saying, you're such a strong voice. You're articulate. You're passionate. You don't back down. You say what needs to be said. Now, and sure, you rub people the wrong way sometimes. But sometimes you got to break those eggs to make progress. Cards face up. I'm a white guy. I'm a 49-year-old white guy, working class, but challenging, a 56 or so year old white guy. And I did look to some progressive women of color first. I said, listen, I'm thinking about doing this, but I would be perfectly happy if you wanted to do this. If you're thinking about doing this, I'll be right behind you doing this, because we need more diverse representation than I could bring. Nobody took me up on it, and time went by, and I said, we got to jump on this and we got to do it. And so here I am, and it's been great. The last year has just been fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah. And I want to get into the incumbent's horrible record. You mentioned the military budget. I want to hit on that specifically, but let's take a look at your district, right? So, I like to show the districts because they tend to be gerrymandered in a ridiculous way. And people sometimes it's deliberately, obtuse for voter suppression purposes, right? Your district isn't one of the crazier ones, but let's look at Washington 02. Like we said, it's a D+10 district. I guess Bellingham is probably the biggest city in your district, and there's the island view.
Everett's the biggest city in the district, right down there, you can see Marysville on the map there, and that's where I live.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about your district? What makes it so great? Why do you love it? That kind of thing.
Well, I will say that Western Washington, having grown up here since 1983, and I actually lived in south of Seattle growing up in high school, but I went to the University of Washington in Seattle. We're about 40 miles north of Seattle. And then I've lived in this district in Everett and Marysville for the last 20 years. And it's just beautiful. I mean, as you can see, we can look out on Puget Sound and it's pristine. And if we look east, we've got the Cascade Mountains. We can see Mount Baker from here. We can see Mount Rainier. Once you get on the freeway heading a little bit south, we can see Mount Rainier from here. Our Salish Sea coastal territory here is absolutely beautiful. We want to make sure it's preserved, but it also presents us with opportunities. Our location here, if you look at the district, we've got more coastline than almost any other individual district in the country. We have just I've tabbed it up as probably around 400 miles of coastline. And I think that we're ripe, and being a progressive district, we're really ripe for investments in new energy infrastructure here. If we can work with tidal energy because we've got so much coastline. We look directly east in Washington. We're sitting on the Ring of Fire. We could be investing in geothermal right here. And so we can bring, and the other thing is we've got a ton of timber forest here. Timber used to be a really big industry here, but we have got to preserve our Pacific Northwest timber forests because they are as important to the healing of the planet as the Amazon. And so I'm very much in favor of scaling back the timber industry and making sure that we have good public transportation here, that we get our cars off on the road. If anybody knows this area, we have absolutely horrible traffic through that Everett area coming up from Seattle. And we've got to do something about that. And I think people here are really green-minded in wanting to preserve their natural environment. There are very few conservative strongholds. If you look east of the district, that's where we have a lot more conservative area in Congressional District 1. But again, this is a progressive area. The Bellingham area, the San Juan Islands have been hugely in support of my campaign.
Right on. So you mentioned timber and the coastline, and sort of cutting back on the timber industry, logging. I always encourage supporters of the Green New Deal to emphasize the just transition component of that, right? So if you're somebody in Washington too, and you hear that, how do you allay those concerns? Like, they're taking away our jobs. Like, talk about the just transition.
It has come up. It has come up. And so when we talk about the Green New Deal, you have to talk about just transition. The reality is we are going to close down oil pipelines. Just to talk about a little bit of the corporate money here. Larson will take a check from TransCanada on one day and he'll tweet his support of oil pipelines the next day. But having coal trains run through our district, we don't want that here. The destruction that we know comes from oil pipelines. The fact that even if we have managed forests are not the same as old growth forests when you talk about their natural capacity to heal the environment. So we want to make sure that we are, for as much as we can, we want to be planting renewable hemp. We want to get our textile, our fiber, our oil, whatever oil we need from renewable hemp sources. And it's not to say that timber isn't important, but we are going to have to scale back those jobs, and we are going to find construction jobs here, building rail. We're going to build our new energy infrastructure here, and we're going to put all the people to work through a federal jobs guarantee and that just transition, and make sure people are earning living wages. And if anybody knows anything about modern monetary theory, that this can be done with the right kinds of federal investments. And not only can it be done, it has to be done. We cannot keep thinking that we're going to tax and spend our way out of this. We have to look at our federal budget in a completely different way and make sure that we are prioritizing those investments: education, healthcare, energy infrastructure, housing, and health. Did I say healthcare? But in a way that it's benefiting our community for long-term sustainability rather than short-term profit.
Right on. Yeah, I heard you mention MMT, and I know you're a strong voice in that. I'd love to have you back down the road to talk specifically about that. But one thing, talking about Rick Larson and his donors, one thing on your website that is fantastic. I'm going to pull up your website here. You have, I guess what you would call Oppo research. Does that look funky?
That's what we call it, Oppo research.
Yeah. So if you look at your website, there is a section called Rick's Receipts, right?
Yep.
And you basically have sort of delineated, where he's taken money from and how it has directly influenced his votes. You want to
Yep.
talk more about this?
Well, I cannot take credit for this. I mean, I've known where Larson has gotten his money. I mean, I think everybody here in the district kind of has an idea of where he gets his money. But I have a guy called Ben who has made this his life's work over the last year, especially over the last 6 months, to really dig deep into all of the FEC filings and see the money that he takes. And you can notice that just today, July 31st, Ben published the tech page where it shows all of the money that he gets from, I haven't even looked at myself, but I'm sure we're looking at a lot of money from Amazon, but in the fossil fuel industry where all that money is coming from. And Ben has done a great job in tying his historic votes to the money that he takes. And I really believe that progressive candidates across the country have got to get on this kind of, I mean, look at that. It's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, right there, you see exactly, there you go. Comcast, tons of money. They don't want net neutrality. And so if you can go back there, what did it say about Larson and net neutrality? I really hope that progressive candidates in the future will use what we have done here as a model of how to go after these corporate Democrat incumbents that we want to challenge and that we've got to get rid of. Because when you look at the COVID relief bills that have come out, they've been absolutely awful for the working class. We haven't gotten more than a $1,200 paycheck, relief paycheck per person. People are going homeless. And you see the 8 richest people in the country making over $500 billion in the last 3 months. But on top of that, the lobbyist industry, but in the HEROES Act, why is the lobbying industry getting bailed out? Well, I'll tell you what, Rick Larson takes more lobbying industry money than any other congressperson in the state, and that includes the Republicans. So people have got to look at the direct A to B connection between the money that they are funded by and the votes that they make. And it's really nice for us because we've got 20 years of record that we can point to and say, like Larson talks about wanting to overturn Citizens United, and I'm sure, maybe he does. But the reality is he has certainly benefited from Citizens United dark money along the way. And there it is. I mean, I would encourage anybody to just go to that website, dig around, and for whoever your candidate is, if you want to get in on digging into FEC filings for your progressive candidate, try and create something like this, because this is where things have to go in terms of that exposure.
Yeah, and let's give a shout out. It's Ben Carpelman is the name.
Yep.
Is his name?
Yep.
Yeah,
Ben Carpelman, and he
my
is
new hero.
at Ben Oshalism, and I promote him on my Twitter all the time. I say, everybody, Ben Oshalism is the guy you want to be following, because not only does he do this particular work, but as Larson is putting out his own tweets, Ben will come right back at him and say, hey, but you voted this way, or you voted for this money right here. And one of the things that I have hammered Larson on is he's kind of come out in favor of legislation that protects or works on the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women, which obviously is a huge problem. But what I wanted to do is directly tie that to oil pipelines. You take a ton of oil industry money. You are tweeting support of oil pipelines. Are you not aware that the working situation around where these pipelines are being constructed on native land, abusing Native American populations, poisoning their land, but also that situation has proven to be directly connected to Native American women being trafficked. Now, if you really want to support missing and murdered Indigenous women, you're going to see support for the oil pipelines that are a huge part of that problem. And of course, he's not going to.
Wow. And that point, that really ties how money influences down to, individual people missing, like your using case in point there to, his weapons manufacturing donors, and he just votes for the military budget, without gives Trump
Yeah, I mean,
space for it, right?
I'll tell you what, these last couple of weeks of votes have really been a gift to my campaign. I've had a number of people tell me that just the fact that he refused to vote for reducing the military budget by 10% that was on the table last week, that sealed the deal in their decision to vote for me over him. So, that it's great that Congress is working on these things right now, because it helps my campaign immensely.
Can you expound on that a little bit for those that might not know that 10% bit?
Okay, so there was a bill on the table. I don't know who brought the bill, but it was to have 10%
Wasn't
of
it?
military
Okay.
funding cut and reallocated, I believe, to healthcare and housing assistance. And, bottom line is Larson voted against it, as did a majority of Democrats. Sadly, there were very few Democrats who opposed that. I want to say that they were like I want to say the number was maybe 93. And of course, all the progressives, were in support of having that funding cut from the military. But Larson, as deep as his ties are to the defense industry and the transportation industry, he simply wasn't going to go there, because that's not beneficial to his, corporate donors.
Yeah, and that 10% wouldn't have even taken it to pre-Trump levels. That still would have
No.
been,
No,
which
our
made it
military
even.
budget. So that's another thing. Our military budget has just been expanding and expanding and expanding over the last 20 years. And he has voted for every NDAA in the Bush administrations and the Trump administration. He's voted for all of them. The only NDAA he voted against was Obama's 2016 one, which Obama said he was going to veto anyway. So it was a safe no vote for him.
Right.
He doesn't do anything unless it's safe. And I'll tell you something. You see me, I'm wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt right now. I have been down to the Seattle occupation, and I have been down to Portland. I actually took a carload of supplies, medical supplies, food and water, from Western Washington here. We gathered supplies locally. I picked up $500 in donation. I loaded up my hybrid SUV, took it on down to Portland, and delivered it down there. The very first time that Larson said anything publicly about Black Lives Matter, about any individuals who have been abused or murdered by the police, and it was June 7th of this year. And when it was safe. My point is that it was safe for him now to say,
Right.
"Oh, I support Black Lives Matter," and yes, wasn't George Floyd's murder a travesty? But his entire 20-year history, he has made no mention of it. We looked at the record. We did the searches. Did he say Ferguson? Did he say Mike Brown? Has he said Breonna Taylor? Has he said Philando Castile? Any of these things? Nothing. Now it's safe. Now the movement's going that way. He says it. But is he ever going to do anything, of any substance, to make sure that we're supporting Black communities and making sure that we get restorative justice? Of course he's not going to. That's not beneficial, again, to his corporate donors.
Yeah. Let's talk a
So it's
little
all
bit about.
performative on his part.
Yeah, unfortunately by a lot of them, but yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about how coronavirus has affected your district, what you would like to do about it, and what he has failed to do about it.
Well, I've got to say, I don't necessarily want to put this, I don't necessarily want to put this on him as an individual with Congress, because we're stuck dealing with the Trump administration on this. And we all know that the Trump administration's response to this has been an absolute tragedy. But and to his credit, credit where credit is due. He has wanted to get personal protective equipment to people locally, and he has kind of said all the right things there for making sure that our essential workers are supported. What he has not done is fought for payments, direct payments to workers who are impacted, and he wouldn't. This is not something that he would fight for. That is the progressive crew. That is the squad who is going to get out there and say, we need to make sure that our essential workers are not going to go homeless. We need to make sure that we have rent controls, and that we have a moratorium on evictions. And those aren't the things that he's going to stick his neck out for and fight for. He will make sure that businesses that are contributing to him get their share of payments, but directly what's going to be beneficial to the working class in terms of cash payments, he's not going to do that.
Right. Yeah. Maybe I was thinking that in terms of framing, like, two things come to mind, and please talk about them. In the time of everyone being forced to work from home or school from home, universal broadband is critical.
Absolutely is.
I'm sure he takes big telecom and Medicare for all. Reality has endorsed Medicare for all. So can you talk about your position on that, Bert, contrasted to his on those two
Sure.
things?
Well, let's start with Medicare for all. I literally got into this race because if you've seen my ad on my website, the health insurance industry killed my mother. That's my personal story to tell, but I have other family members who have been treated terribly by the healthcare system. And Medicare for all it saves money, it expands coverage, but it does require substantial federal investment. And what it does say is we're not going to have a profit margin for CEOs and shareholders. We're taking that out of the equation. We're not going to have for-profit healthcare industry. We're going to make sure our providers get paid well. That's one of the pushbacks that people sometimes have on Medicare. Well, Medicare's not a great system for me. It doesn't pay for this. It doesn't pay for that. So people need to understand that Medicare for all is a substantially different program than the existing Medicare. I've been saying recently, I wish they had not called it Medicare for all. I wish they had simply called it National Health Service or something like that. Because some people, even though Medicare, for all intents and purposes, is a wildly popular program, it also has some substantial deficiencies that Medicare for all does take care of. But we've got to get profit out of healthcare. We need to invest in more hospitals, more rural healthcare centers, more doctors, nurses, and support staff, and make sure that they're all paid living wage and well compensated for their services. And that hits the pocketbooks of the health insurance industry and the hospital association. And if people didn't know, Rick Larson's background prior to coming to Congress was he worked for the Washington Dental Association. He was a lobbyist for the Washington Dental Association. So that's where his ties are. And he has said he will not support Medicare for all. He wants to expand the ACA, but he wants to keep the profit in the system. And absolutely, for me, that's the wrong way to go.
Right.
And then broadband, sure. We have a lot of rural areas in this district. You can see it's a fairly spread out. And I have been plenty of places in my district where signal will drop. And we can't, internet as a utility now should be, I really believe we should simply have nationalized internet along with other utilities, that it's a public utility. We need to make sure, I talk with my constituents about this. Why can't you get better internet service? Well, you're a small rural community. You're not near any population centers. It's not profitable for the telecom industry to lay cable, lay fiber optics or whatever it is out to your community, because they're not getting the return on what you're going to be paying for them. So they just leave you hanging. But it's absolutely critical in this day and age for education and just for general connectivity to your community, especially in this time where we are far more housebound for however long we need to be to make sure that our communities are safe. But you can't cut people off from the outside world. And that's exactly what's happening when we don't have rural broadband. So I think that's another area that we've got to get federal investments in. And if the federal government just needs to take over the industry, then we take over the industry. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Right on. So the election is August 4th. I want to just kind of review just a little bit. So Medicare for all, and if you want to, sort of springboard on any of these, by all means. Medicare for all, Green New Deal, getting money out of politics. Obviously, you don't take any corporate PAC money. I think that goes without saying. Ending the endless wars. We didn't touch on that too much. Criminal justice reform, women's rights, disability rights, LGBTQ rights. Endorsements, Our Revolution, Sunrise, several local district Democrats, Washington Progressives, a bunch more listed on your website. Anything else that you want to? Anything else on those you want to expand on or hit on?
Like I said at the beginning, I got my start in anti-war activism. I think we need to cut the defense industry budget by 50%. I also want to say, most of that money goes to to contractors, if they even track it at all. I mean, we have these situations where billions and billions of dollars in cash just go missing. It's unaccountable. We're other countries where we have invaded. I've opposed the wars in Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan. Another thing that Rick Larsen just voted against is having troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. But that has been where my home has been in activism for the last 30 years. You know, I want a more globally cooperative world. And the United States military. Not only that, the United States military is the biggest polluter on the planet. But I also want to say the military should not be a jobs program, but people who do go into the military, and so I'm anti-militarism. I'm not necessarily anti-military. I came from a military family. I don't have a problem with an individual's nation's defense capacity. But what we have is military adventurism. We have a 70-year history of the CIA suppressing democracy around the world, but particularly in Central and South America. We see it going on in Venezuela. We see it going on in Bolivia right now. And that kind of military adventurism, which is purely for corporate profit, is part of what's causing our immigration, quote unquote, problems. People say, well, you know, why do they want to come here? They don't want to come here because America is necessarily that much better. They want to come here because America right now, I mean, we have destroyed their opportunities in their own country. And, you know, I could go deep into how many ways that we have done that, but that's really the root of the problem. So
plus,
stopping military adventurism is huge for me.
Right on. Yeah. Plus climate migration, which is we're just seeing the tip of, right?
Yep.
You know, it's
climate refugees also.
Yeah. If anyone hasn't seen Ai Weiwei's Human Flow documentary, I encourage everyone to check that out. It's funny, as you're talking about that, you know, you're 49-year-old white guy, same as me. And I was thinking of this recently. If you grew up in the Star Wars generation, you don't recognize who the Empire is right now. You're not fighting against that.
Exactly.
You miss the point of Star Wars altogether.
Well, and I've actually even made that point on my social media. You look at what's happening with the police brutality, and I've said, if this were a movie, you'd know who the bad guys were, you know. But for some reason, we have this cult of police worship in this country, which actually brings me to one thing I did want to say is I have signed on to a Road to Abolition platform called 10 Demands for Justice. And if you want to go to the website, it's 10forjustice.com. But we are talking about reparations. We are talking about eliminating qualified immunity, and restorative justice, of course, federal legalization of marijuana, which is something that the incumbent imposes. And so there's all sorts of things. There is a roadmap to getting to ending the carceral system that currently exists in this country that is so destructive to so many communities.
Awesome. And what's the website for that again?
It's 10forjustice.com.
Right on. I would imagine he opposes all 10 of those without even seeing them.
Probably. I haven't had a conversation with him yet. He's ignored our campaign completely.
Why would you, oppose a qualified immunity when you can paint Black Lives Matter on the street? That's plenty, and that's plenty of change that we need, right?
There you go.
That performative stuff is, while appreciated, is far from.
It doesn't get to the roots of the systemic change that we need.
Right on. Well, Jason, again, the election is August 4th. I appreciate your activism heretofore, and thank you for running. I'm hoping you make it into the top two. The other 6 Republicans, they are, enough of that.
They're out there. They're out there,
and
I'm really confident that we will.
Right on. Cool. So I'd love to have you back in the general, and we can, get into some of this other stuff at a deeper level. But, good luck on Tuesday. The website is callforcongress.com. Jason could use donors, I'm sure, grassroots, no corporate PAC.
All grassroots, no corporate PACs. Yep.
Send them $5, send them $10, send them $100. Volunteer to text, to send emails, whatever. Get behind. There's still, I keep saying, and during each of these segments, when Charles Booker lost, like that was a gut punch. Bernie dropped out, gut punch, right? But there still are completely winnable progressive seats that we can pick up.
Absolutely, there are. Absolutely.
And this Washington 2 is one of them, and Jason is the guy. So he needs our help. Let's get behind him. So Yeah, so yeah, it's been a real treat to chat with you, Jason. I look forward to
Thanks
doing
so much,
in
Eric.
the future. Yeah, cool. All right. Thank you,
All
Jason.
right.
Good luck on Tuesday. I'll talk to you soon.
Have a good one.
Thank you.